Hello, everyone. Good morning to you if you're in Singapore or elsewhere in Asia, and good morning if you're in the Americas, like our speaker who is joining us from Peru today. Again, hello, my name is Carmen Pang, and I am with the Public Outreach and Engagement Committee of the Jane Goodall Institute, Singapore. And I want to welcome y'all to our second JGIS Conserve Action lecture of 2021. And we're very excited to continue with our theme of Tales from the Americas. But before we get to the presentation, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items. First, in order to minimize distraction and conserve bandwidth, may we ask all of you to mute your microphones and turn off your cameras during the presentation. And also, we've heard feedback that we should go ahead and spotlight our speaker. So I'm going to do that. Once we start the presentation, I'm going to be spotlighting the speaker. And for you to have a bigger screen, if you're not familiar with it, you can actually adjust the ratio of the presentation window and the speaker window. So you can have a bigger presentation screen. Okay. Secondly, also please note that the webinar will be recorded and the recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, where you'll also find recordings of our past lectures. And Ernst, who has kindly agreed to help us with this lecture today, he is typing in the website address for our YouTube channel in the chat box right now. So please do check it out. And lastly, please use the chat box to ask any questions you have for our speaker, and we'll get to them in the Q&A segment after the presentation. Okay, now that we've taken care of those housekeeping items, I'd like to bring in Dr. Andy Yang, President of JGIS. And Andy will be telling us about JGIS and what we do. Andy, are you there?
Yes, thanks so much, Carmen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
So I'd like to do a little introduction on the Jane Goodall Institute in Singapore and what we do if you're not familiar with us. For JGIS, our vision is for people to live in harmony with nature, and we would like to inspire, educate, and activate individuals to make a better world, not just for animals, not just for people, not just for environment, but for all three: animals, people, and the environment. You can find out more about what we do and how to get involved from our social media platforms. And for Jane Goodall Institute in Singapore, we were set up in 2007, and we are a charity organization in Singapore, which also means that for us, a lot of the activities that we do are volunteer run, including our board members and the people who are behind the scenes supporting the committees. We're all volunteers. And for Jane Goodall Institute, we have three main strategic pillars. Number one is the roots and shoots, where we actually work with the students and the teachers to come up with projects from the ground to look at different aspects on how to conserve the environment, how to protect the animals, and how to also work with the community to make a better place for all of us. And we also have the Wildlife and the Environment Committee. Previously, it was called the Primates Committee. And here, we actually work very closely with the three main primates, non-human primates in Singapore: the long-tailed macaques, the Raffles-banded langurs, and also the Sunda Solorus. What we do include monkey walks, where we bring people out to nature reserves, which we can't do right now, to actually look at macaques in their natural environment and to understand a little bit more about the local biodiversity. We also have monkey guards, who are trained volunteers deployed to residential areas who are living very close to nature reserves, who come into contact with wildlife like monkeys and wild pigs. And we can actually work with these residents to see how we can coexist with wildlife in the area. We also have citizen science program, where we train volunteers to go out there to collect data on the primates and also use this information to work with authorities to come up with strategies to protect these animals. We also have the Public Outreach and Engagement Committee. And over here, we focus a lot more on outreach activities, including what we have today, which is the lecture series. And this lecture series actually was kick-started by Dr. Jane when she was in Singapore in 2017, where she was sharing her perspectives and her hopes for people to live in harmony with nature. Then we started to invite our friends, speakers from Southeast Asia, from Malaysia, speaking about gibbons and langurs, to Indonesia, and also to Vietnam. Also speakers coming in from Cambodia and also Thailand. So Dr. Ramesh was sharing a little bit more about the biodiversity crisis, conservation, education, and how communities can participate. We then celebrated primates in Southeast Asia with Camille, who was sharing about the red shank dukes in her work site, which is in Laos. And I was also sharing a little bit more about the primate conservation work in Singapore. Dr. Jim visited us again in 2019, and that was sharing a little bit more about her goals for people to live in harmony with nature and how we can actually do that in our individual capacity. We then move on to Africa, where speakers were sharing a little bit more about chimpanzee research and rescue, and also about baboon research in Gombe, which is the place where Dr. Jane started her work. And then we move on this year to the New World in Central South America. So a couple of months ago, we had Dr. Andreas Ling sharing a bit more about the spider monkeys in South America. And today we have Dr. Sam, a good friend of mine, to share a little bit more about the woolly monkeys in Peru. So if you're interested to support volunteer-run events like this, please consider donating to Jane Goodall Institute with these two options here. And so over to you, Carmen and Sam.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. Okay, now let's move on to the main event. And usually this is when I bring in my JGIS co-host Vilma Di Rosario to introduce our speaker. But unfortunately, Vilma cannot make it today and she sends her regrets. So the honor to introduce our speaker today lies with me. And we are very excited to have Dr. Sam Shanee with us today to speak about the critically endangered yellow-tailed woolly monkey. Sam is the founder of and projects director of Neotropical Primate Conservation, which is based in the UK and which is where Sam is from. Before establishing NPC, Sam worked on various wildlife rescue and reintroduction projects in South America, Asia, and the Middle East. And in fact, in Asia, Sam was in Indonesia and also in Thailand, and he has passed through Singapore a few times. So he's quite familiar with our Southeast Asian, I guess, wildlife and conservation. Sam holds a Master of Science degree in primate conservation and a PhD in conservation and ecology of Andean primates. Both are from Oxford Brookes University in England. And since 2007, Sam has been in South America carrying out conservation and research in Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia. In his work, he tries to bridge the gap between academia and activism to promote the conservation of primates and their habitats. And he does this primarily by involving the local communities in area management and anti-wildlife trafficking campaigns. And right now, Sam lives in the city of Mayo in Peru, which is where he's joining us from today. Okay, Sam, the screen is yours.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Carmen, for the introduction, and thank you all for the invite to be able to speak here tonight. Um, as Carmen said, I'm Sam Shanee, originally from the UK, but now working in Peru. Tonight, I'm going to speak about our work with the yellowtail woolly monkey and conserving it through community action. But I'm going to begin with a little bit of personal background. I think this is important so that you see more where I'm coming from and how I ended up uh, where I am today. I hope you find the talk interesting, and I look forward to answering any questions at the end. So originally, I'm from London, Tooting Bec, the neighborhood, really huge city. But luckily, in London, we have lots of green spaces. And as I was growing up, I loved playing in the park. At the weekends, we'd go to my grandma's, who lived just outside London, and there was a big forest near her house. And my favorite thing to do was just run around the forest playing games. And as I grew up, I always hoped to be able to do that for the rest of my life.
Sam, could I interrupt?
Yeah.
For we have heard a few comments that you're very soft. Could you?
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
I will speak as loudly as I can. So yeah,
Thank
as
you.
I grew up, I just loved playing in the forest, and that became my aim in life. So in 1999, I was very lucky. I got the opportunity to travel to South America. First of all, to Brazil, just as a backpacker, and for a month, and headed back to England. But I definitely, caught the travel bug. So at the end of 2000, I headed back to South America, to Ecuador. And it was while there, even though I was supposed to head back to England, I had a job and things waiting for me. I decided that I'd stay in South America and travel as much as I can. It was during this trip that I ended up in Bolivia, and in a hotel, in the hotel lobby, there was a small A4 photocopied sheet saying, "Why don't you come and volunteer minimum 2 weeks at a wildlife sanctuary?" So I thought that would be an interesting thing to do. Um, Pretty soon after I got there, they actually asked me if I would be willing to stay longer and look after a puma. That's the puma in the top left photo there. For me, that was just like the best offer I'd ever had in my life, and I said yeah. And I ended up staying there 6 months, and that's what I wanted. I found what I wanted to do with my life then, and that was to help animals, to conserve nature. So with my then partner, we carried on traveling through South America, volunteering at different places. And then when that trip finished, going back, working, saving up money, heading off to other countries, Israel, working with desert species as Carmen mentioned, in Indonesia with orangutans, in Thailand with gibbons. And it was while in Thailand that one of the volunteers spoke about the master's degree program in Oxford Brookes. And I always have to mention them because I had no first degree. I didn't study as a biologist, and kudos to them. They accepted me on the course thanks to my experience, obviously, with certain what's the word, criteria. As long as I passed with high enough marks during the initial semester, I was allowed to continue the degree. And I focused my project then on spider monkeys in Ecuador. So I was back to South America, and this was my first project in cloud forests. And just for anyone who doesn't know cloud forest, it's amazingly beautiful, but it's not the easiest habitat to work in. After 3 months, bit more than 3 months of field work, this was the best sighting of my focal species that I got. So anyone who's thinking about starting working or studying primates, don't be put off if occasionally you have setbacks. Um, so yeah, back to Oxford, and made a friend there called Angela Maldonado, who she's Colombian, still works in the Colombian Amazon with common woolly monkeys. That's a picture from her site in the middle there. And she was looking for people to help run her investigation in Colombia in the Amazon. So finished studies and headed off to Colombia and worked for, I think, 8 months on the common woolly monkeys. And while it was there, it was actually Angela who said, hey, there's this woolly monkey in Peru that no one's seen for many years. Why don't you go and check it out? That turned out to be the Yellowtail woolly monkey. This was back in 2007. Um, so we went with my partner at the time, went to Peru and began a very short survey, just a couple of months, to different sites to see if this species was still around and in what conditions it was in. We found it at several sites, but we also found that because of the cloud forest terrain, because of the social and economic situation in the area, and the rarity of the species, that we felt it was unlikely that it was going to get the attention that it needed as a critically endangered primate. Sorry, jumping ahead of myself. So we went back to the UK, and with some friends that we knew from previously volunteering and from the master's degree, set up NPC, Neotropical Primate Conservation. The idea was to bring together our experiences, what we'd seen working on other projects that had worked, and try to incorporate them in a single project, first project, focusing on this species. Here's a bit more geographic context. You can see Peru there on the Pacific coast of South America, um, the the coast, and then the Andes running north to south through the country, and to the east, the Amazon, into Brazil, Bolivia in the south, Ecuador and Colombia in the north. Those two stars, the bottom star is where I'm actually sitting right now. The top left star is where we began our project work. This is a closer view. The village of Lesperanza, which is a village of about 50 families, is where we set up the project. The yellow square is where we began our field work with the primates. It's about 3-4 hour walk there. Can't see really clearly, but there's the village of Lesperanza is on the main highway between the coast and the Amazon, the only paved highway crossing the country in the north of Peru. So it had advantages for the project, as it had easy transport, it had telephone signal, the modernity that you need to be able to run a project, but it was also very close to intact forest. But what you can see here in the picture, the lighter green is deforestation, is fields, cattle pasture, crops. So wherever a road goes, I'm sure you all know this, people follow, and people head into the forest. So, sorry, bit more background on Peru. Um, Peru in general is known as a mega diverse country, and in primates especially, it's got between around 50 species. Taxonomy is changing all the time thanks to genetics and more studies. So I never like to put exact numbers, but it's about fifth in the world for primate diversity at the moment. 11 of those taxa are endemic to the country, only found in Peru, nowhere else in the world. 8 of them are endangered or critically endangered. And I'm not sure if you're all aware of this concept, but the country contains 2 of the recognized biodiversity hotspots, the tropical Andes, which is where we work, and the Tumbes Choco hotspot, which is in the north coast. Sorry, that photo just appeared there. So here are the list of Peru's endemic primate taxa. You have saki monkeys, you have squirrel monkeys, tamarins, and their third from the bottom is Lagothrix flavicauda, which is the yellowtail woolly monkey. The other 2 endemic primates, which are in the area we work, and we also focus a lot of conservation effort on them, are the Andean or Peruvian night monkey at the top left, and the San Martin titi monkey there on the top right. Bit of background now on the yellowtail woolly monkey. It was originally discovered in the 1800s by von Humboldt, I'm pretty sure, who never actually saw one in the wild. He described it from a skin being used as a pack saddle on a donkey. After that, it was only recorded by scientists again in the 1920s, and then nothing until the 1970s when people were beginning to assume it may be extinct because no one had seen it. Then a team from the US headed to the cloud forests near to where we work now to look for it, and they found it, but again, they didn't see it in the wild. They found a pet who was being kept in a local army base by the engineers who were building the road into the forest. After that, after this long hiatus of no one seeing the monkey, some field studies started with Mariela Leoluna, who still actually works in Peru, a good friend, and works on the species still, carrying out some initial behavioral studies and distribution work. But when we got there, aside from this, it was still one of the least known primates in the world. Just uh, let's talk a bit more about the species now. It's a large Atelid, a member of the Atelidae family, with the other prehensile tailed monkeys, the spider monkeys, the common woolly monkeys, the howler monkeys, and the woolly spider monkeys in Brazil. Is the largest primate in Peru and one of the largest in South America. The total body length, including the tail, is over a meter. Adult males can weigh up to or over even 10 kilograms. They have this amazing dark red color you can see in the photo. Um, and really, it depends on the angle of the light, the time of day, the sunshine. It can be a really intense red, or they can look dull brown. It's an amazing species to see in the wild. It's named for the tip of the tail. On the underside, you can just about see wrapped around the branch a small patch of yellow. That's where it gets its name from. But as we'll see a bit later on, it has a much more distinctive yellow patch in the genital area, and also this white muzzle and light-colored eyebrows. I think someone's microphone's on. Sorry. So we began the project in Lesperanza, and as I said, little was known about the species. So the first thing we had to do was gather the information to be able to plan conservation actions. For me, in its most basic form, to be able to plan conservation for a species, you need to know four things: its distribution, where is the species, abundance, densities, how many of the animals there are at the different sites, what it needs to survive, i.e., the habitat that it needs, what it eats, and finally the threats that it's facing. We've also, through the years, done a lot more and been part of many studies which aren't so focused on conservation. One of the most interesting ones was the taxonomy study, which geneticists came to our site to collect samples. And because at the time, it was actually classed in a different genus to all the other woolly monkeys. It was Orionax in its own genus. But in part, thanks to that study and similar studies, its taxonomy got resolved and it joined the other woolly monkeys again. Um, so yeah, the results of our distribution work, and also since we began, other primatologists and conservationists, Peruvian and foreign, have been working on the species. You can see the map in the middle shows where the distribution of the species is in the whole of Peru, which is still very limited, although it might look quite large. The black dots in the map on the left are sites where the species has been confirmed. The Andes aren't on this map, but as I mentioned, they run north to south through the country. So the yellowtail woolly monkey is found on the eastern slopes of the Andes from the state of Amazonas running down south to Huánuco. If you notice, there's one point in the very far south of the map in Junin. That was a recent accidental discovery by another group who were doing camera trap surveys in a new reserve in the south. And everyone, including ourselves, we thought that the species wasn't found that far south, because if you notice in the region of Pasco, there's actually a big empty space, and people have been in there, including us, looking for the monkey, and they never found it. So we assumed that that's where its distribution finished. But then this other group discovered a completely isolated population down south. Recently, we've been carrying out field studies with another local group, and we managed to find them in a few other sites down south, but it seems to be a very small restricted population, which is probably in great need of conservation. On the map on the right, this is kind of the geographic area where we work. I mentioned the three endemic primates that we focus our efforts on. They're all found in this area. It's limited in the west by the Huallaga River, by the Marañón River, sorry, and to the right, to the east, by the Huallaga River. Within this area, there's not just these three endemic primates. There's also endemic bird species, endemic plant species. It's a real subcenter of endemism within Peru and within the tropical Andes biodiversity hotspot. So it's very, very important in general terms for conservation. This is a short video so you can see our main field site. I'm not a professional drone pilot or a professional video editor, but this will give you an idea of the kind of terrain that we work in. That house in the bottom of the screen is the researcher accommodation. There's bunk beds and so on. And that's in a cattle pasture of a local resident who let us use his land for many years. The community that this is in is a working community, so it's not primary pristine or not primary virgin rainforest or cloud forest. You can see there's a lot of cattle pastures, small isolated holes in the forest. Instead of being fragmented forest with small patches of forest left, it's the reverse. It's like forest Swiss cheese with small patches of deforestation inside. So yeah, from our studies on the behavior and the ecology of the yellowtail woolly monkey, and from those of other researchers recently, generally, groups of the species are between 9, 14 individuals, but there's sometimes you find smaller groups. Sometimes at some sites, much larger groups, up to 30 animals or more, have been encountered. Also, you occasionally find solitary individuals. This is probably young, emigrating from their natal group, the group they were born in, to find a new group and a mate. Population densities are between 10 and 20 individuals per kilometer squared, which is pretty low, hard to picture in your head. But as I mentioned, they're the largest primate in Peru. They need a lot of space to survive, to be able to find enough food to feed themselves and the whole group. And yeah, sorry. Groups are generally made up of a few adult males, some more adult females, and then the young in the group. Is an interesting result from our field studies. Sorry, a loud bike just went past. From our first field studies in 2008, 2009, we did some work to estimate population densities at the site. And then we repeated the same study, exactly the same transects, exactly the same methods, again in 2012, 2013. So a 6-year period. And what we found was that there was a significant increase in the number of animals there. Our first thought was, maybe this isn't a good thing, because it could be that in the area around, as we saw in the drone video, there's a lot of pasture. Maybe a lot more has been cut down recently, and the groups have been moving into our area from outlying deforested areas. But when we looked a bit more detailed, the densities, the only significant increases were in juveniles and infant animals, which means that the groups were getting larger. It wasn't that there were more groups. So this seemed to be, I'll get more to the conservation and community work in a minute, but this seemed to be a positive result of the community conservation work, where local villagers had they banned hunting themselves. It wasn't that we came in and said stop hunting. We came in and explained that the species is special, that the species is only found there, that it's critically endangered, and so on. And as it's not an essential part of their diet or whatever, they decided that between themselves they would stop hunting the animals. And so it seems that that had a very, very positive effect on the local population. We also did some basic studies and we continue them in diet. Sorry, in their activity budget. About 30% of their time feeding, similar amount of time resting and traveling, some social activities. The graph at the top, without going into too much detail in these graphs, you can see the dashed line. That's their restings. As you go through the day, they they're very active at the beginning and the end of the day, but they like to have a really nice siesta around midday, just lunchtime, which is always nice. If you're following them in the forest, you get a bit of a break. You can see that their activities, the more active ones, moving around and feeding, have a related drop in activity when they're resting. Also, in the bottom graph, you can see that their throughout the year, their activity budgets changes. This is depends on fruit availability and so on. They'll spend more time traveling and foraging when there's less food available, and during the rainy season when the fruit's a lot more abundant, they can spend more time relaxing. Here's sorry. Here's a little video of a young yellowtail woolly monkey enjoying the sun, just scratching some flies that's bothering it. I don't know about you, but I always love to see these animals, especially the yellowtail woolly monkeys. There's something for me very special about them. Sorry. Yeah, so then we continued studies on diets. These results are from our field site, and a botanist friend of ours produced, together with, I think it's the Field Museum in Chicago, produced this booklet of easy identification guide of fruits and food species in the diets of the yellowtail woolly monkey. So you can see they're mainly fruit, 46% of their diet, but also leaves, insects, mosses, lichens, buds, flowers. And again, as with their activities throughout the year, you can see in this graph that their diet is highly variable through the year. When there's more fruit available, generally they eat more fruit, but in lean times they can adapt their diet to eat leaves and insects and other things. One really nice thing, and I'm going to show off a bit here, that our friend Robin, who did the botany work, he discovered a couple of new magnolia species while he was with us at our site, and he named one of them Enepeciana, which in Spanish, NPC, Neotropical Primate Conservation, is pronounced NPC. So it's the NPC magnolia, which we're really proud of. Here's just a short video of mother and infant feeding on ripe figs. This is obviously not during the lean time. There's plenty of fruit on that tree. And yeah, just I included this video. There's no monkeys in it, but it's the other videos. They're calm and they're quiet, and I don't want you to get the wrong idea that they're always so docile. This is a video of alarm calls of a yellowtail woolly monkey group. They're out of sight, but I think you'll be able to hear them. So yeah, when they scream like that, they're pretty easy to find, which is good for us, but not so good for them, because hunting still does go on in a lot of their habitat. So getting back to the results of our study, as I mentioned earlier, they have very large, they have low densities, which means they have large home ranges between 150 to well over 200 hectares. But within that, they have a smaller core area, which they use more, and that's generally determined by the composition of the trees in the forest. Usually there's more of their preferred fruiting species within the core area. They spend most of their time high up in the trees or in the subcanopy. They very rarely come down low. But after a few years of studying them, it seemed that they became accustomed enough to our presence that they'd lost their fear of us, and they actually started coming down to the forest floor to eat soil. This is to supplement vitamins in their diet or to get rid of toxins from mature leaves. So we set up a load of camera traps at the different salt licks soil sites where they eat. This is just very short 5-second video of an adult male. As I mentioned earlier, you can see the yellow on the inside of the tail very clearly there, but you can also see the large male genital tuft. The females have as well, but it's much smaller. So yeah, now to the sad part. As Carmen mentioned in the introduction, they're a critically endangered species. They've been listed on the International Primatological Society list of the world's 25 most endangered primates, I think 3 times. And during all our distribution work, our initial surveys and later surveys, you find things like the photo on the left. That's a new road being built by a logging company into a forested area. Not just the logging company, but when roads are opened, people come in. Often it's locals who want to expand their farming area, or people emigrating from other parts of Peru where land is scarce and they're just looking for a better future. But also a real problem that we have in Peru, and I think it exists in most of the tropics, is land trafficking, where organized people go in, organized groups, and they try and take control of areas, unsettled areas, and then illegally sell this land to other people for farming. And the other great threat for the yellowtail woolly monkey is from hunting. This photo on the right is actually the first yellowtail woolly monkey that we saw. It was being kept as a pet, offered for sale by villagers nearby. This animal actually died quite soon after this photo was taken. One of the things with primates, I'm sure a lot of you know, is they shouldn't be pets. They don't make good pets. They need to be in the wild for their own health. So to not just focus on our research work, I'm also going to speak a bit about the conservation outreach works that we do. So core component of all our work is education, environmental education, not just in schools and colleges, but adult education as well, because when you're in a situation with a critically endangered species and urgent action is needed, it's the adults who are making the decisions at the moment. So education in schools and colleges is needed for the future, but for decisions to be made promptly, you need to also reach the parents, the adults, and the authorities. We also teamed up not 1 year, sorry, for several years with the local university in Amazonas State. They have a teacher training program. So what we offered them is that if they're trainee teachers who need to do their practical experience to get their degree, would teach an environmental education syllabus, we would coordinate with local schools in the remote rural villages where we're working, so that they could carry out their funded by us practical component of their degree program. The school, these are very remote rural schools, often with only 1 or 2 teachers for all the different year groups. The school will benefit by having extra hands, extra teachers present, and they would bring a strong environmental component into the curriculum. Also, out of that, thanks to the work of some very dedicated local teachers and ex-students who are now teachers, we were able to publish a textbook, because we noticed that the environmental science textbooks that they use in these schools gave examples, which are great, of giraffes and elephants and tigers and lions and chimpanzees. But living in one of the most amazingly biodiverse areas in the world, why weren't they also talking about the local wildlife, the local flora, the local fauna? So together with this group and the local environmental educational authority, we produced a textbook using local species and local situations as examples. Um, we've also carried out field courses and produced other textbooks and work with lots of wildlife authorities as well. Another core component of our work is anti-wildlife trafficking. I'm not going to speak too much about this. I already mentioned that it affects the yellowtail woolly monkey, but uh, in Peru, wildlife trafficking is affecting almost all primates and many other species, and is one of the centers of wildlife trafficking in South America, if not the world. The photo on the left is we coordinated with local police at a what's the word, impromptu market in the city of Pucallpa that was the center of open wildlife trafficking in Peru. You could go there and on any given day find 4 or 5 species of primate, as well as alligators, anteaters, deer, whatever, sold as pets, sold for meat. And after several years of campaigning, not just by us, but also for the health concerns, the municipality bulldozed the market, which is the photo on the right, and built a much cleaner, more sanitary new municipal market just outside the center of town, and relocated the non-illegal stalls. So no wildlife sales, at least not on open view in the new market. So this was great progress, but there's still a lot needs to be done. Okay, so now I'm going to focus a bit on the community conservation work we do. Again, here's the 3 endemic primates that we use as flagships for conservation, and the Marañón Huallaga landscape where we focus our work. This San Martin, which is the state that I'm in right now, is the most deforested region of Peru. And the immigration rates into Amazonas, into San Martin, in these areas are among the highest in Peru, if not the highest. And so what you find is that your conservation has to be done hand in hand with local communities. It has to also benefit local communities. You can't just create huge national parks because there aren't these huge areas of forest left. Although there are some state-run parks which have existed for the last 20, 30 years, but new ones it's not possible to create. So we began our project, as I mentioned, in Lesperanza. The idea was to work with the community to create a small, maybe 1,000 hectare, in Peruvian terms, a small 1,000 hectare reserve on community lands. And after initial successes there, we actually got visited by a neighboring community who just heard about our work, and they said they were interested in conservation as well, and that they had a reserve. And this kind of made us scratch our heads, because like we haven't heard of any protected area nearby. So we went to see them, and they'd actually been protecting the upland forest, the hillsides above their village where the water for their houses came from, and also they had a mini hydroelectric plant for the village. So they'd been conserving that to conserve their water supply, but they'd been doing it unofficially. And so what we said is, if they wanted, we offered them that we would help them get government recognition for a new reserve in their name that would permanently and legally protect the area they were already protecting. From this, other communities began to hear about our work and hear about the possibility of conservation areas in the names of communities, that it wasn't just something that outsiders or the government did. So we organized 2 meetings, 2 3-day meetings, one in the capital of Amazonas, one in the capital of San Martin state, where we invited literally every single local municipality, district municipality, and as many communities as possible to attend. We helped them with their travel and their accommodation while they were attending the meetings. and invited all conservation NGOs and local government and authorities to present conservation options and the need for conservation to the local community participants. And at the end of it, we said, we don't want anyone to tell us anything now, but please go back to your communities, explain what you've heard here. And if you're interested in conservation, then here's our phone number, call us. This resulted, obviously, in a lot of phone calls. A lot turned out to be nothing in the end. But others have turned into long-term, more than 10-year in some cases, conservation projects. We've helped create reserves with managed and in the name of the local communities. We've been helping train local park guards to protect the areas. We've assumed as an NGO the costs of setting up the reserve and all the paperwork and the logistics and legal fees and so on, because these are the vast majority rural agricultural people. A lot of them haven't even finished primary or secondary school. They don't have disposable incomes. Conservation of this kind of model, although legally it's an option for them, it's out of reach without help. We're now not the only NGO working in this way with local communities. It's become quite a boom in San Martin and Amazonas, with now dozens and dozens of communities with their own legally protected areas and conservation work on a more landscape scale with reduced hunting. I'm not saying all problems are finished, but it's been really amazing. If you look at the map on the left, that's San Martin, Amazonas state, as I said. The light gray areas are the government protected areas, and the black areas are community or local privately protected areas. So you can see that there's even some huge areas almost as large as or larger than state protected areas, and then there's lots of smaller conservation areas managed or run by local communities and local people throughout the area. And this is what's the word? This is given a much greater chance of survival for the yellowtail woolly monkey and the other species, which inhabit the area. The graphs on the right are just from 2001 to 2019. This is on the national level, but the growth, you can see steady growth in the three kinds of locally protected area. Legally in Peru, you can have a private conservation area, which is the top graph. That's on titled land. Some communities have have communal land titled to areas tens of thousands of hectares. And the lower two graphs are conservation and ecotourism concessions, where on untitled lands, individuals or groups can ask the government for permission to manage the area for conservation or tourism for up to 50 years, I think it is, and renewable. So you can see since 2001, when this laws first began to come into effect, there's been steady growth and steady interest, not just in the number of areas, but also the amount of land under this kind of protection. So yeah, that's a very brief description of my work in Peru and the yellowtail woolly monkey. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the invite, and our website and Facebook page links are at the top there, and we always appreciate donations.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I have to say, it's, before contacting you, I have actually had zero knowledge about the yellow-tailed woolly monkey. So that was very, very interesting. And I can see that there are a few questions that came in. So I'm going to go ahead and start it off with one of my own questions. How would you describe as the temperament of the woolly monkeys?
That's a very good question, and I'm going to give a non-scientific answer, which I'm actually stealing from a friend. There's the fight or flight reaction that I think everyone's aware of. Just as a comparison, with spider monkeys, as I mentioned when I did my master's research, we almost never saw them. Sometimes we were aware that they were there, but as soon as they were aware of us, they would run. They don't run, they would brachiate through the trees and get away as fast as they can. The yellowtails and woolly monkeys in general are more likely, as you heard in in that vocalization video, they'll stand their ground and give threatening displays. Um, that's their temperament when they feel threatened. But once we have the habituated groups who are very used to our presence, they're very relaxed. They're pretty chilled.
Okay, so it's peace loving, not necessarily.
Yeah, if you leave them alone, they're very peaceful, but they'll fight.
Okay, pretty much like very much like our own species.
Yeah,
Okay.
but much nicer.
Okay, I think I can see that Andy has asked a question. Andy, would you like to go ahead and ask your question for Sam?
Yeah, so I was wondering where that yellow, because it's called yellow-tailed woolly monkeys, and you explained that it's from the tail and also the tuft of hair, the genital hair, right? So do they develop once they reach sexual maturity, or right from when they're infants?
No, the males definitely aren't born with such a large tuft. In the infants, it's not noticeable at all. As they grow up into sub-adults, it begins to develop. In the females, it never gets as developed as in the males. But yeah, it's definitely something which comes in with adulthood, with maturity.
Thank you. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, we have more questions. Let me go ahead and go through these. So we have quite a few actually audience members who are interested in the role that government plays. So what, I mean, you mentioned that there are some protected state lands, but what does the government do in terms of conservation? And also, there's one question about the illegal gold mine that is happening. So the question is there a concern that the illegal gold mining happening in South America will start to go into your conservation area? And, I guess, is the Peruvian government doing anything more to conserve primates and other
Okay.
wildlife?
Yeah. I'll start with the gold mining question. That the area which is mainly affected by gold mining is alluvial gold mining, which is in the lowland Amazon rainforest, mainly in the south, but unfortunately, it's also reaching to the northern Amazon. But the yellowtail woolly monkey and most of our work is in the montane or pre-montane forests. So it's not the right kind of geology or area for that kind of illegal gold mining. When I was doing the distribution surveys towards the south of the range, there are legal gold mines, but these are very well established. They're not open pit mines. They have their mini train, which goes into the tunnel. So, yes, that will have an effect on the species, but nothing like you see in the news of what's happening in the lowlands in the south, which is really worrying actually. And okay, the link being the government has begun or did begin to come down quite hard on the illegal gold mining once it got really out of hand, but it's just such a large problem in the south now that it's going to be a long and difficult road before they can reach any kind of final solution. And one of the problems is corruption, where a lot of local government are actually involved in the illegal gold mining down in the south. Um, I said a moment ago, it's also beginning the same kind of dredging and illegal gold mining in the north, but it's still at a small enough scale that hopefully the government and the prosecutors will be able to stop it before it gets out of hand. In other conservation activities, it's very dependent. There's like the Rio Obiseo National Park has been around since the 80s, I think, as have and 90s, 2000s, new national parks or state protected areas have been created in the range of the yellowtail woolly monkey. But the actual level of protection they receive is variable. Rio Aveseo has remained pretty much intact, but I think that's a lot because it's so just hard to get to. It's montane forest. There's no road access. There's no real way in, so it's remained protected. Another area much nearer us is the Alto Mayo protected forest, which was created in '86, I think, but it never even had a management plan or a park guards for the first 10 or so years of its existence, and it's still there's a lot of conflict with local populations, human populations. But when you get to the community conservation side, Peru had a process of decentralization where the forestry department is no longer solely controlled by Lima. Each regional government has its own Autoridad Regional Ambiental, regional environmental authority. So it depends a lot on local political will. We were very lucky in San Martin that for 2 terms, like 10 years straight, we had a regional government which was called the Green Movement, and they really pushed and helped us and helped all the other NGOs with the creation of all these community reserves. Meanwhile, in Amazonas, for many years, the regional government, even though it's obliged to have an environmental authority, didn't fund them enough to be able to properly carry out the work they needed to do. So you had these people in positions, authorities who wanted to be helping conservation, but they just didn't have the funds to do it. So it really does depend.
I see. Thank you. Andy, could you help me ask the next question, please?
Continuing on the topic of conservation and protection of the area, there's a question on, so it says that it seems really unique that people were already protecting their watershed areas. Do you think that was an existing cultural custom?
It sorry, it did seem it surprised us at the beginning. Because I remember in school and TV in the 80s and 90s, slash and burn forestry, the Amazons disappearing, and it always portrayed farmers as the bad guys. Um, and so we were not expecting everyone to want to kill us, but we weren't expecting that they would get behind conservation so much. But then when we thought about it more, it made sense because these are the people who live nearest the forest or even in the forest and depend more than anyone else directly on the forest. So even though a lot of the I'm not talking about indigenous communities here, I'm talking about immigrant communities from the Andes who've moved down looking for land. But they've on their own they've discovered that, if people start cutting the forest up high, this is an actual example from one of the community reserves, how they explained it to us. They settled the valley, which is better agricultural land, flatter. But then more people came and they began deforesting up the hill. And then they noticed that the water in the river was dirtier, that during the summer the water level was lower. And they put two and two together, and it like they knew that they needed to protect it, and so they began protecting it. So yeah, we were pleasantly surprised, and obviously it's not everybody in every community is into conservation, but there's a lot more understanding of the necessity of conservation in rural communities than a lot of people expect.
Very interesting. Thank you. So I also have a follow-up question on
Okay.
that then. So you mentioned that obviously land encroachment is a problem, and also poaching. So are the poachers locals, or are they like, for example, in Africa, where these are run by organized crime syndicates? And also, is the poached wildlife, is it mostly for the illegal pet trade, or are people actually, is there a bushmeat culture as well?
Okay, I'll answer that question in reverse order. There is definitely a bushmeat culture from the very strong and lasting indigenous cultures in the Amazon. It's been like that's their natural diet since forever. Um, but where that crosses the boundary into illegality, because the indigenous people are still legally allowed to hunt and consume their traditional diets, but when it moves to market, where it's no longer in indigenous territories, it's moving into immigrant territories, or even getting to the coast. You can go to Lima and you can eat monkey from the Amazon. That kind of trade does exist, and monkeys aren't generally the most favored bushmeat, but unfortunately, the larger bodied Ateles, Lagotrix, are the most hunted primate, mainly for meat. Um, One of the additional problems is that in local communities here, I'm not talking about organized groups, there may be a preference for shooting a female with an infant, because then you don't only get the meat, you also get the baby animal to keep as a pet or to sell on for extra income. And what we did in our community work is explaining about how slow the reproduction is of large bodied mammals, of the yellowtail woolly monkeys in particular. So if you need to kill an animal to eat, then maybe focus on the rapidly reproducing wild rodents. There's big, not rats. I'm talking about large rodents, or other species which can cope with higher hunting pressure than the large body primates or bears and so on. Hunting is a very complicated thing here. As I said, the indigenous communities have always hunted and are allowed to hunt. Immigrant communities are kind of on the borderline. And we, in our community work, we never speak against hunting for personal consumption, for feeding the family. That isn't something that conservation needs to be going up against. When it becomes markets in cities or restaurants offering it on the menu, not only is it affecting the wildlife, it's also affecting the local communities, because they're going to have less to hunt for their own subsistence. Um, the main hunters are local people, but for the pet trade and for the what do you call it, for bushmeat trade, but to cities and so on, there are organized mafias, and it goes really hand in hand with illegal logging and other illegal trades. Like in the lowland, we went to an area which is all forestry concessions to do some inventory work, and there were illegal loggers working just upriver from us, and we were there on the day that they were floating their timber down the river, and in their canoe they had deer, they had monkeys, they had wild pigs and so on, so live, dead. So it's a very complex subject.
Yes, very much. I guess all conservationists around the world conserving any type of wildlife species, I think we're all seeing the same problems, really.
Yeah, one thing which is a personal a thing which gets to me is, yes, hunting and wildlife trade in Asia, in Africa, is terrible, but it's always, from my experience, underestimated in South America. When you look at statistics from the UN or from big wildlife trafficking programs. The neotropics, the South and Central America, is always has much lower numbers. Perhaps there's less organized international trade because there's no elephant tusk, there's no ivory, there's no great apes. But if you actually look at numbers, individual numbers, maybe traded locally, traded nationally, it's definitely in the same area.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I guess I never thought about that, exactly what you're saying. Okay, well, Andy, can you help us with the next question, please?
I have two related questions. So one is there a ban on snare hunting? And the second question, besides human predators, what are the natural predators of woolly monkeys?
Okay, I'm not 100% sure if there's a complete ban on snare hunting. We've never come across like wire snares like you see in the Virunga National Park and so on. But what they have here is they call them trampera, where they saw down old shotgun barrel to just a couple of inches long, put a cartridge in with a spring loaded like a mousetrap and a tripwire. So anything walking past will trip it and it'll fire the shotgun. And because the barrel on the trap is so short, the pellets don't follow a close trajectory. They spray out in every direction. Pretty maybe not lethal, but definitely going to hit anything which trips it. And that's actually a threat to local people as well. Investigators, I actually know someone who got shot in the knee by one of those. She was several months with wires in her leg and so on. But I'm not sure. Those are definitely illegal. I'm not sure if wire snare traps are illegal. What? There was another part to the question. Sorry.
Oh, what are the natural predators of woolly
Okay.
monkeys?
Woolly monkeys, they're the largest, among the two largest bodied primates in South America. So they actually have few natural predators: harpy eagles in the lowlands, jaguars, pumas. I think the young could be taken by, or can be taken by ocelots, by other small wildcats or other raptors, but generally, the very young are carried by the mother, and the group is generally fairly cohesive around the young. So only the largest predators could get them.
I see. Okay, our next question, we're moving a little bit away from the conservation aspect of it. So could you please elaborate why the size of the family groups increased? And did you say that it didn't imply that the overall population did not increase? And also, do they have a hierarchy within the group, and how is this displayed? What is their social structure, fission fusion, or do the males or females leave the group to find a new one?
Yeah. Okay. First part. Okay. When we measured the density at the beginning of the project, that was when it was the first thing we did in the forest with the monkeys to see how many there were. At the time, there was still some low-level hunting going on within the community, and it's a working community, so obviously new fields were being cleared throughout the period of the project. And then when we counted again after 6 years, we know that no hunting had taken place in that area of the community since we began. We knew of a couple of other yellowtail woolly monkeys which had been caught in other areas of the community. This is a very large area, like 83,000 hectares the community owns. So yeah, our initial thought was that because of deforestation around our study site, that animals which lost their habitat there were moving in. But the number of groups within the area didn't increase. What increased was the number of animals in each group, and that increase was in babies and juveniles. So it was the population increased, as in the number of monkeys increased, but it was a natural increase from reproduction because hunting pressure had gone away. That's our best way of explaining it. In that same study, just to make sure that, or to examine the effect of deforestation in the surrounding area, also did some satellite monitoring with at before the project, at the beginning of the project, and during the second survey. And we also noticed that area within 2 home ranges and 10 home ranges of yellowtail woolly monkeys from that study site, the deforestation levels were now significantly lower to the regional average. So we're pretty confident that it was actually a natural increase because of the local participation in conservation. And yeah, I can remember the second part of the question this time. Yeah, they were suggested and still occasionally suggested to have a form of fission fusion. Not sure how much you'll know. Spider monkeys have real fission fusion like chimpanzees, where a very large group will split up into smaller subgroups and they'll go about their business within the territory for days on end without meeting up with the rest of their group. And then when they do meet up, they'll split off into different subgroups again. We haven't found that in the yellowtail woolly monkeys. What they do during the day, they can separate into smaller groups, subgroups, or the main group, and then maybe a group of 4 or 5 will head off on its own. But they generally maintain themselves within vocalization distance, which can be quite far because they're pretty loud. But occasionally you'll be following them, and one will do a call, and it'll get a reply from a group which is out of sight. But then by the end of the day, they've usually, or always, from what I remember, come together to sleep together. So they can fission during the day, but they're not for long periods. And yeah, they have one adult male who's the leader of the group, but they also have I've forgotten the term here. I'm always speaking in Spanish, not English. They have a lead female as well. Maybe you could help me with the word. There is a term for it. Alpha male and alpha female. That's it. Alpha. Yeah, they do have that. But it's not, as I said, they're pretty calm animals, so it's not very pronounced. Like there's not much within group aggression.
And what about the hierarchy within the group, and how do they display this hierarchy?
The alpha male occasionally will chase other animals, other members of the group, and females. We're actually in process of analyzing 5 or 6 years of continuous behavioral follows. So I don't have the confirmed answer for you yet, but in preliminary work we did, where a year and a half, where we looked at intergroup spacing between the individuals, and it's generally that the females and the young are females with young or pregnant females are more separate from the lead males than the rest of the group, probably for protection of the young. But we don't see much aggression. Sorry, I can't give more detail in this case.
No, we'll have to have you back for a follow-up webinar then.
Yeah.
Okay, Andy, do you have another question for Sam?
Two. I might have missed this during your talk, but in your study area, what other species of non-human primates are also found besides the yellow-tailed woolly monkeys? And so how do they coexist or not with those primates?
Okay. I didn't actually mention this, so you didn't miss anything. In that study site, the Lesperanza study site, it's in the cloud forest. It's at roughly 2,000 meters above sea level. So all the Amazonian species don't reach that high. But you do get the Andean night monkey, Peruvian night monkey, which is also endemic. that and the yellowtail woolly monkey are pretty much always found together, but one is nocturnal, one is diurnal, so they hardly ever interact. We have seen, while following the yellowtail woolly monkeys, that they come across a nest of the night monkeys. The night monkeys will run away. Um, and but also you get just coming up from the lowlands, uh, white-bellied spider monkeys and capuchin monkeys, but at much lower densities. They're much less abundant. Like the spider monkeys, we've only seen 2 or 3 times in 10 years. Um, in the area with the yellowtail woolly monkeys, and the same with the capuchins. We know there's a big group there, but they're very rarely seen. Um, they have we've seen them encounter the yellowtail woolly monkeys and the capuchins encounter each other once, and there was a lot of screaming and genital tuft displaying and so on. And really
Who will
interesting,
win in those fights?
it never actually comes to a physical fight, but the yellowtail woolly monkey is about twice the size of the capuchins, so my money would be on the woolly monkeys. Although capuchins are pretty sly, they might pull something off. With the spider monkeys, really interesting. The first time that we saw yellowtail woolly monkeys at that site, we then got back to where we were staying at the time, and we videoed it, and it was from quite a long way off. When we were watching the video, something seemed a bit funny. Then we'd like paused it and looked closer, and within the group of woolly monkeys was a white-bellied spider monkey living with the group. Um, we didn't find that again when we went back and found the same group, but then a couple of times, as I said, we have found a single spider monkey hanging out with the woolly monkeys. The spider monkeys, we know, there as you go further north from that area, the Andes goes down, so you get into more lowland forest, and there the woolly monkeys are replaced by spider monkeys, and common woolly monkeys further on. But I guess there's a bit of overlap, and they seem to be friends.
That's very interesting. Okay, we're about 8 minutes out from our scheduled wrap-up time, so I think maybe we do 2 more questions, and then we can wrap up.
They keep coming in pairs, these questions.
Well, it's a lot of them are following along the same theme, right? So I see here. There's one that is asking, in terms of developing agrarian activities in a cloud forest, how do they do it? Is it terraced, and how is it controlled?
Okay, that's a very good question, and I remember from my time in Asia the amazing terracing that goes on. You do not get that here. The people who are settling the cloud forest, they're coming from the high Andes, and mainly it's cattle ranching, corn, potatoes, things like that. You get rice cultivation, but in the river, in the valley floor, in the flat areas. They haven't terraced up the mountains. This is one of the major problems because they bring from the high Andes their agricultural practices to this new kind of ecosystem where it's not adequate. Like in the high Andes, since the Inca time, um, they've been cultivating crops, but they aren't the same as should be grown in the lower elevation in the cloud forest. As I mentioned, the Incas, I have to say there is quite a lot of Inca terracing, and they did. But where we are, you don't get that. And that causes major issues with landslides, with fertility loss in the soil very quickly. Cattle ranching is very extensive, like 1 cow per hectare or something. Um, and so yeah, the general practice is to clear a bit of forest, plant some crops for the first year or two, and then turn it into quite often natural pasture, which is just let whatever grow and let the cows eat that. So yeah, uh, it's not adequate for the ecosystem. With proper development, it could improve that practice, which would reduce a lot of pressure on could improve practices which would reduce a lot of pressure on the environment and be very beneficial to local communities, but there just isn't enough emphasis on that at the moment.
I see. Thank you. Okay, I think Andy has our last question for you.
As with our past lectures, we will ask this question to our speaker. So if you had a wish for the yellow-tailed woolly monkeys, what would it be?
A wish for the yellow-tailed woolly monkeys. I wish that they don't go extinct. That's the short answer. It would be great. I don't know if you remember in the final slide of my presentation, there was a big block of black community protected areas joined on to a couple of large state protected areas. A slightly more specific wish than not to go extinct would be that that solid block of forest maintains its integrity, that remains as a forest. If everything else is lost, it will be very sad, but the species will still be able to survive in that area.
Well, I hope your wish come true, Sam. And we wish, we wish, the same for all wildlife, that, basically that they don't go extinct and that they're all protected. So that's why we rely on people like you. So thank you very much for sharing your insight and your knowledge and your experience with our audience today. And I also want to thank our audience. You guys have asked some really great questions, and thank you for joining us. And as with all other our previous lectures, now we're going to ask everybody to turn on their cameras, and we're going to do a Wi-Fi. So I think Ernst is going to help us take the Wi-Fi. Are you there, Ernst?
Yep, got it.
Okay. Let us know when we need to do what. Smile.
Okay, will do.
Yeah, in terms of
Just waiting for a few more to turn on the cameras.
Books as part of the main coffee table, unless
Okay, so those of you who want to join us, please turn on your camera.
Is it okay?
Well, we have a few more to turn on the cameras.
I think maybe some are shy. So let's go ahead and take it. Say cheese, everyone.
Okay, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, yep, we got it.
Thank you, Ernst. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, guys. And thank you again, Sam. Thank you, Ernst. Thank you, Andy. And please do join us for our next conservation lecture. Follow us on our social media, and we'll keep you posted and updated. Thank you, guys. Have a great weekend, and have a good evening, Sam. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the
Thanks
invite.
so much, Sam.
Thank you all for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Sinwei. Thank you.